Stefan stood at the door for a long time. He was hesitant to ring the doorbell. It seemed to him that as soon as he'd press it, his life would change forever. Finally, after mustering up the courage and overcoming any second thoughts, Stefan did ring the doorbell. Goodness, nothing's changed in 5 years. Even the bell sounds the same, thought the man sadly. He heard footsteps shuffling behind the door. Finally, the doorknob turned, and there, on the doorstep, stood a woman in her mid-20s, wrapped in a thick bathrobe. "Stefan, what are you doing here?" exclaimed the woman, stunned. "What do you mean, what am I doing here, Megan? This is my house too, in case you forgot," replied the man, adjusting the bag dangling over his shoulder. "After what you did, there's nothing for you here anymore. You can live wherever you want. You can even live on the street for all I care. Kevin's already forgotten about you. Just get out of here, Stefan, or I'll call the police, and you'll be charged for interfering with other people's lives." Megan raised her voice. "Other people's lives? What are you saying? Kevin's my son," Stefan exclaimed in despair. All Stefan got in response was the loud sound the door made as his ex-wife closed it in his face. Stefan staggered away, lowering his head and trying not to notice the sympathetic glances of the passers-by. They all seemed to feel sorry for the man, whose face had sorrow written all over it. At first, Stefan thought that his life was over, but he pulled himself together eventually and realized that he couldn't just give up. He had to fight till the end. It's been 2 days since Stefan was released from the state prison, where he had served a 5-year sentence. Sure enough, even simply thinking about his time behind bars gave the man a headache and filled him with anguish. Stefan decided not to dwell on the events that led him to prison in the first place, and to leave it all in the past. In his state of self-reflection, the man walked around a couple of blocks before he finally came up with a clear plan of action. The first thing Stefan did was go to a newsstand where he bought the latest issue of the local weekly newspaper. The man had absolutely no interest in the news or entertainment sections. All Stefan was looking for was the last page, where people posted ads about renting out their homes. He sat on a bench and studied the listings, occasionally making phone calls to the numbers provided in the ads. Stefan didn't get lucky immediately. He had to sit through at least a dozen ads before he found the right fit for him. Finally, fortune smiled upon him, and he found a suitable place to live. To his surprise, a pleasant, girlish voice answered the phone, and his heart immediately skipped a beat. The woman on the phone introduced herself as April and set up an appointment for the two of them to meet. To tell the truth, Stefan wasn't expecting things to happen so quickly. Not wanting to be late for the meeting with the landlady-to-be, the man picked up the pace to get there on time. Stefan was getting frustrated as the address was rather hard to find. When he finally turned the right corner, he could see April waiting for him at the door of a large, rather run-down house. "Looks like they could use some help with renovations there," Stefan said to himself. The man took a professional look at the state of the house he was going to live in. "Hello, Stefan. Please come inside," April said with a charming smile. Stefan looked at the landlady for a moment and then accepted her offer. His eagerness was partially due to the fact that it was late fall and it was rather cold outside. To Stefan's surprise, the landlady was a pretty woman of about 20. She had long hair down to her waist, a slender figure, and huge glasses on a tiny nose, which made her look a bit like a dragonfly. Upon entering the house, the man immediately noticed the plain decorations and how badly the place needed renovations. He suspected that no work had been done on the house for at least 10 years. "And this is your room, Stefan," said the landlady, opening the door to a corner room overlooking the backyard. "Oh, thank you, miss. Everything looks good. Now, about the payment. You see, I haven't found a job yet, but I'll definitely start looking tomorrow. Would it be alright if I gave you only half of the amount as a deposit?" Stefan asked, a little embarrassed. After hearing the man's words, April's face changed and her forehead wrinkled. It was obvious that the woman was hesitant and didn't know what to do. Then, looking into Stefan's open, sincere face, she smiled and nodded in agreement. Finally, for the first time in 2 days, Stefan could clean up and have some decent rest. In the meantime, April had made her tenants some dinner, which seemed like a true culinary masterpiece to the ex-convict. "Thank you, I appreciate it," Stefan said as he shook the hostess's tiny hand. "Oh, you're welcome. You're probably the only person who likes my cooking," April replied with a smile. For the first time in 5 years, Stefan was going to sleep on a clean, soft bed, which was nothing like the one he had in the prison cell. Of course, Stefan had no way of knowing what the landlady was thinking in the next room. Meanwhile, April couldn't understand what it was about her strange tenant that made her like him so much. The woman felt that Stefan had been through a great deal of hardships that hadn't broken him, but on the contrary had strengthened his will and character. April Dixon, on the other hand, had always felt like a failure. She inherited her house from her grandmother, who had died 3 years ago. April's mother died in childbirth, which came as a painful blow to her father. April had never seen her father, and all she knew from her grandmother was that he was a farmer and lived on the other side of the country. April's personal life was no good either. Her friends always said that somehow she managed to attract the worst kind of men, who always took advantage of her kindness and generosity. So, when April first saw the new tenant on her doorstep, she vowed to be careful and not to take his words at face value. One can only imagine April's amazement the next day when she saw that her tenant had fixed the faucet in the bathroom and replaced the leaky pipe under the sink. "You're really good with your hands. I've been struggling to fix these things for days. Thank you," said April admiringly. "You're very welcome, miss. That's actually my job. I used to be a construction worker in the past, you know, at least until—" Stefan stopped mid-sentence. "Until what?" the girl asked anxiously. "Until 5 years ago, when I went to prison," Stefan answered in a shaky voice and immediately turned pale. The man knew what it was like for ordinary people to learn that the person standing in front of them was an ex-convict. "If it's hard for you to talk about, we could come back to it some other time," April remarked cautiously, who was uncomfortable with the position she put her tenant in. "Oh no, what's the point? It's my past, and I can't just hide it from the world for the rest of my life," said Stefan and began his story. As it turned out, 5 years ago, Stefan Matthew had a construction crew that took on contracts for all kinds of work. Everything was going well. He had a beloved wife, Megan, and a sweet son, Kevin, who had just turned 10. One day, coming home from work earlier than usual, Stefan found his wife cheating on him in their bedroom. This came as a shock to Stefan, and his mind went blank. To this day, Stefan can't recall how he grabbed the vase from the bedside table in a fit of jealousy, or how he hit his wife's lover with it. When the man fell down, Stefan went over to the phone and called the police. Then he went over to a chair, sat down, and calmly waited for them to arrive. Fortunately, his wife's lover survived, but Stefan was still sentenced to 5 years in prison. Unfortunately, the judge did not take into account Stefan's emotional state at the time of the incident. Having heard Stefan's story, April buried her head in her hands and sank tiredly into a chair. It was clear to the woman that her tenant was a victim of unfortunate circumstances that were mostly out of his control. In an attempt to reassure him, April reached out and touched Stefan's arm. This made him smile. At that moment, it was as if an invisible spark had flashed between the young people. It seemed to instill hope for a bright future in their hearts and confidence in each other's friendship and support. Right after this difficult conversation, Stefan called up his old acquaintances who he used to work with 5 years ago. Unfortunately, most of his former companions wanted nothing to do with the man whose reputation had been tarnished by a criminal record. Only one of them, Floyd Johnson, was willing to give Stefan a job. "Doesn't the fact that I'm an ex-convict put you off?" Stefan asked cautiously. "Of course it doesn't. I remember how good you were on the job and how many firms you sought out and considered it an honor to have you work for them. I don't care where you spent the last 5 years of your life," said Floyd with a smile. Now that there's a glimmer of hope in Stefan's life, he had transformed completely. His old acquaintances and former colleagues couldn't help but notice this. And Floyd Johnson wasn't wrong. Stefan was a true professional when it came to construction. When he finally got to a similar environment, Stefan felt truly free. In the meantime, he began to spend more time talking to April. At one point, he invited her to dinner at a restaurant. Stefan was happy to see the joy in the eyes of the young woman who had considered herself a loser her entire life. Slowly but surely, the young people began to date, growing more and more attached to each other with each passing day. Stefan didn't rush things. He showed restraint, giving April the opportunity to enjoy their romantic relationship. It's hard to pinpoint the exact moment when love blossomed between Stefan and April, but there's no doubt that it hit them like a train. When Megan learned about her ex-husband's success, she came to an unexpected realization and even felt a bit of remorse. Megan learned of the couple by accident when she saw Stefan at the anniversary party of the head of the company, where he used to work. To Megan's disappointment, Stefan didn't care about what she had to say. However, he did promise to support Kevin in anything he'd choose to do in life. One day, coming home from work, Stefan caught April looking through some old letters. "What are you up to, honey?" Stefan asked cautiously. "Well, I found some letters addressed to my mother. They were written by my father, and I just found out that he never actually abandoned me," Rachel exclaimed. Stefan stepped closer, and April explained everything. As it turned out, Pamela Dixon's parents were against her relationship with Glenn Foster. They deliberately broke up the couple who took everything at face value, being still young and inexperienced. Thus, because of her grandparents' bad decisions, April was deprived of her father, who she'd been missing all these long years. Using his old connections, Stefan managed to locate Glenn Foster, who was overjoyed to be invited to his daughter's wedding. This was the best gift April could have ever gotten for her wedding. She'd been waiting for it her entire life. Meanwhile, Stefan was happy to see his bride finally find peace of mind and true happiness. Thus, the newlyweds went on to live their life full of true love.